So this is the new MacBook Neo. It's the internet's favorite laptop right now because this is the first truly affordable MacBook Apple has ever made. It starts at just $599 or 70,000 Indian rupees, and with this, Apple has truly shocked Windows laptop makers with how aggressively this thing is priced. And this here is the 4-year-old M2 MacBook Air that is still available for some $799 in the US or 80,000 rupees in India, which I think is the biggest competition to the Neo instead of any other Windows laptops at this very price. That's why I spent an entire month comparing these two to figure out one thing. Should you buy the MacBook Neo, or does it make more sense to spend a little more and get the M2 Air instead? Well, that is exactly what I will be talking about today. I also threw in the OG M1 MacBook Air into this comparison to see just how well it holds up to the Neo. So let's begin. Okay, I want to start with the performance because I'm pretty sure that's the first thing you want to know about the MacBook Neo, because it's essentially using the same A18 Pro chip as last year's iPhone 16 Pro Max. Meanwhile, the M1 Air and the M2 Air come with Apple's M series chips for Macs. Now, you can think of the M series chips as beefier, more desktop class versions of the A series chips with more CPU cores, more GPU cores, more memory, and overall better sustained performance. But despite that, since the A18 Pro is a much newer chip compared to the M1 and M2, it actually performed really well in my testing. In fact, it comfortably won in all of my single-core benchmarks. From something demanding like Cinebench 2026 to Geekbench 6 that sees how well a chip can handle basic day-to-day tasks, the MacBook Neo was far ahead of both the M1 and the M2 Air. In simple web browsing tests as well, I found the A18 Pro to be 16% faster than the M2 and a whopping 40% faster than the M1 Air. That being said, in literally every multi-core test I ran, the MacBook Neo came dead last. But I don't think that matters a lot, because for most people, what matters more on a laptop is how quickly app launches and how snappy and responsive the UI feels in general, which is where you need faster single-core performance. So it's no wonder that in my regular work day, where I had a couple of dozen tabs open with Spotify running in the background all the time and also some light Photoshop work now and then, I never felt like the MacBook Neo was actually struggling to keep up with me. I thought 8 gigs of RAM would be a massive bottleneck, but man, I was so wrong. The way Apple implements swap memory to temporarily use SSD as RAM so freaking well, I think it's the most underrated thing about Mac OS, if you ask me. Although the read and write speed of the SSD on this thing is pretty slow, just like what we saw on the M2 Air's base variant, which has a single NAND chip. By the way, you cannot configure the MacBook Neo with more RAM, just more storage. Now, as for the GPU, the A18 Pro once again trails behind both the M1 and M2 chips, since these two have more GPU cores. But the MacBook Neo did perform slightly better in my tests with ray tracing involved, since the A18 Pro has hardware-accelerated ray tracing support, unlike the other two. But overall, if your workflow is a bit more demanding than mine, then the M2 Air with its more powerful GPU, better multi-core CPU, and 16 gigs of memory is definitely going to make a massive difference. For example, I tried compiling a code base and it was faster on the M2 Air. I tried running them through Puget Bench's video editing tests on DaVinci Resolve and photo editing tests on Photoshop, and same result. So if you're into video editing, some light 3D work with Blender, or if you want to run local AI models, then spending a bit extra cash on the M2 Air is going to be totally worth it, trust me. But if all you want is a basic productivity machine for browsing the web, streaming videos, and doing simple 4K edits for Instagram Reels, then the MacBook Neo is absolutely unmatched at this price. But push it a little further than basic tasks and you'd be wishing you had the M2 Air in your lap instead. Okay, I want to talk about the design next, and I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that despite being the cheapest MacBook ever, the MacBook Neo has better build quality than most Windows laptops that I have seen at this price. It's got a solid all-metal shell, nothing bends or creaks. I can open it up with one hand, and it also comes in a bunch of neat color options, including this citrus finish, which is my personal favorite. Now, for the bad news, Apple has made some weird compromises with the MacBook Neo just to upsell the Air. The first compromise is that the newest 256GB model does not have Touch ID for biometric verification. Personally, I approve my logins, my passkeys, app installs, and other sensitive activities with my finger on my MacBook, so bypassing all of that with a simple password felt really insecure to me. And while this thing has the same magic keyboard as the M1 and M2 Air that I've absolutely loved typing on, this one's not backlit. It's such a basic feature, and I never ever dreamed that I will be complaining about the lack of a backlit keyboard on a MacBook, but here I am. The USB situation on the MacBook Neo is quite bizarre as well. It does not have MagSafe like the M2 Air and only a couple of Type-C ports and a headphone jack, but instead of high-speed USB 4 connections which you get on the M1 and M2 Air, the MacBook Neo only has one USB 3 port and even one USB 2 port with extremely slow read and write speeds. So I tried copying a 40GB folder from my Samsung T9 SSD and it almost took 20 minutes using the USB 2 connection, whereas the same thing was 15 times faster using the USB 3 port. By the way, the MacBook Neo's USB 3 port can also connect up to a single 4K 60Hz monitor, while the M1 and M2 Air support up to 6K 60Hz external displays. What really surprised me is that Apple also designed a new mechanical trackpad for the MacBook Neo. You probably already know that Apple's Force Touch trackpad has been my favorite for years, so I was very disappointed with this downgrade. But you know what? After using it for a month, I found the MacBook Neo's mechanical trackpad to be actually really good. Other than missing out on the shortcuts, every single gestures work as I'd expected: pinch, swipe, multi-touch, you name it. What's even better is that unlike how similar mechanical trackpads on budget Windows laptops feel very stiff near the top and don't click very well, the MacBook Neo does not have that problem at all. Okay, so what about the displays on these three MacBooks then? Well, here too, Apple has left out two common display features on the Neo from the MacBook Air to try and make this guy look a little less appealing. Besides these heavy, thick bezels, the first compromise on the Neo is that it does not support True Tone. I honestly don't miss it so much, but what's funny is that the Neo still has an ambient light sensor, as you can see. So it seems to me all Apple did was software lock the True Tone for its cheapest MacBook. That's such a classy move from Apple. And unlike the MacBook Airs that cover 100% of the P3 gamut, the Neo only reaches a little over 70%. Now this is perfectly vibrant for streaming content or even some light photo editing jobs, although if you're an app or web designer and if you use tools like Figma and Illustrator, this could be a bummer. But besides that, I don't have any other complaints with the newest display. It's got nice viewing angles, text look plenty sharp, and with 500 nits of maximum brightness, visibility was never going to be an issue here, not when I'm working in my office or even when I take it outdoors. Let me talk about its speakers next, because here too the MacBook Neo has some compromises. It is rocking a pair of side-firing speakers, which I think is a first on a MacBook compared to how the M1 Air has front-firing speakers, while on the M2 Air we get 4 speakers in total hidden between the keyboard deck and the display. And I must say the Neo does not sound too bad on its own. It gets decently loud enough and everything sounds nice and clear. But after I compared it with the other two, the downgrade in audio quality became clear immediately. It does not sound as full and rich, especially when putting it next to the M1 Air, and I also noticed how narrow its soundstage is. The webcam on the MacBook Neo is pretty great though. Its 1080p camera is obviously miles better than the M1 Air 720p camera, while its microphone quality and image quality are pretty much identical to the M2 Air. Finally, there's battery life, which turned out to be the most surprising thing about the Neo for me. It literally has the smallest battery on any MacBook ever, so naturally I was not expecting much in terms of battery with this thing, but I have been getting consistent like 9 to 10 hours of screen time, which is super close to what I have been getting with the M1 and M2 Air. I also took a closer look at its power consumption, and I'll just let these graphs speak for themselves, because even under heavy CPU and GPU usage, the A18 Pro was only sipping about 5 watts of power, which is like 2 to 3 times less than what the M1 and M2 chips needed, which is absolutely insane. Mix that with the A18 Pro's more efficient 3nm manufacturing process versus 5nm on these two, you can see why the MacBook Neo screen on time is so damn impressive despite its tiny battery. I just wish its charging speed were better because the slow 20-watt power brick that Apple ships inside the box takes nearly 4 hours for a complete refill. Now, the good news is that even though Apple does not mention it officially, the MacBook Neo does support up to 30 watt of charging speeds, and my 65-watt PD charger was able to take it from 5 to 100% in almost 2.5 hours. To compare, the M1 and M2 Air support 45-watt and 67-watt charging respectively. Alright, so let me wrap this all up, and based on everything that we've discussed in this video, which budget MacBook should you actually buy? So if you're in the Western markets, the new MacBook Neo is priced so aggressively there at $599, and it actually makes a lot of sense to go with the Neo. But for my Indian audience, I'd say don't go with the MacBook Neo right now. The MacBook M2 Air is available at a very similar price on Flipkart, and it's simply a much better overall product. I guess if you're really tight on money and if you're eligible for that 10,000 rupees discount under Apple's student discount program, then the MacBook Neo does make sense for 60,000 rupees. But for a current MRP of 70,000 rupees, just go ahead and get the M2 MacBook Air instead. So choose wisely and don't make the wrong choice. Alright everyone, which MacBook would you go for? The M2 Air or the MacBook Neo? Please let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Saying this, I'm Pratima and thank you so much for watching. Bye.